my good friend and also RIT's Information Security Officer, Aldwin Mulatto. He joined RIT as the ISO in July of 2016, a graduate of the MIS program in which I teach, also an executive MBA from Saunders, and a certified information security manager and information systems auditor, bringing over 20 years of experience in information security and information technology. High level of technical and security expertise with proficiency in current data protection best practices, standards, and applicable legislation, and well-versed with principles and techniques of security operations and risk management, data governance, and incident response. All those things we watched all those slides about in my class, right? Aldwin has a comprehensive understanding of industry frameworks, approaches, and standards, and has been my go-to with the NIST CSF. As RIT's ISO, he heads up the Information Security Office at RIT, and he partners with the university community to achieve the Institute's mission by maintaining an appropriate level of information security risk that's in alignment with the institution's academic portfolio, research agenda, and educational model. There's a lot more here to read in your bio, but I'm going to stop there because Aldwin, I think, is ready to go. And I think everybody else is kind of ready to switch gears a little bit and hear what you have to say. So do we have a presentation tonight, or do we have open forum?
Just have a few slides to share with the group. And certainly, just as with the last presentation, if you have any questions, comments, or whatnot, feel free to pop them in the chat or just, hit me up with your question.
Again, we are excited to have you here tonight, so I appreciate it. I appreciate your time away, and I'm glad you got a chance to chat with Chris for a second there too. And so I'll step back, and you have access to the slides. You're all set.
All right, so let's see here.
Good time for the interpreters to
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, you're all set.
All right, fantastic. So again, thank you, Rick, and thank you, everybody. Glad to be with you here this evening. And thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today about how we manage information security risks at RIT. So wanted to share with you just three key things tonight. The first one is information security today at RIT. Our approach to managing information security risks, and lastly, a glimpse into the future of information security at RIT. So, as you all know, RIT provides a diverse and rich technology ecosystem designed to facilitate and deliver an outstanding education learning experience. Like many organizations, information is critical to the university and is one of the university's most valuable assets. We view this as something that fuels what we do today and guides what we will do tomorrow. As such, it is imperative that we remain vigilant and protect this valuable asset against a constant stream of attacks that threaten the university. More about that in a second. So RIT has long been a pioneer in information security. As far back as 2003, the Information Security Office was founded, when it was prior to my time. And with that, the university recognized that information security is no longer a bubble in the back of the IT office, but rather a swath of people, process, and technology spanning the entire university. Now, we continue to enhance our risk-based information security approach through our alignment with the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is widely considered by many as the industry gold standard. We envision a future of continued acceleration in the proliferation of IT in the areas such as mobile, Internet of Things, and cloud, and as Chris previously mentioned, social media, social. RIT is evaluating and making strategic investments in areas such as AI, artificial automation, and enterprise information management, to name a few, to ensure that we're poised for the future. Now, we understand that the providing a diverse, rich in technology ecosystem to our users necessitates the need for exploration and security everywhere and in everything. And really fundamental to that approach is to ensure that we have the right people, process, and technology to secure our critical systems. Now, it's important to understand the threat landscape in order to appropriately manage risk. So at the university, the most significant cybersecurity threats come from those that originate from cyber criminals, specifically activity that originates from crime groups. Now, some of these activities include business email compromise attacks. Not sure if the group understands what that particularly is. So that really is somebody that uh, pretending to be somebody from the organization, kind of similar to what Chris was talking about earlier, where somebody pretends that, hey, this is the CFO or a high-level senior executive that contacts somebody from the inside and asks them to divulge information or hand over account numbers or even worse, transfer money. So that's one of the key threats in the university. Um, they're really aimed at pilfering university funds. In addition to that, we also have phishing and ransomware. Now, all of these things are aimed at really exploiting the information assets of RIT. A critical and alarming development has been in the increased collaboration and specialization amongst these crime groups. This is evidenced by some of the attacks that you've seen in the municipalities. And matter of fact, back in June, the University of San Francisco, California had to pay out 1.14 million in ransomware payments. So the bad guys are getting very good at collaborating with each other. And that's deeply disturbing. Now, part of what we do to try to combat that is to try to work closer with each other as well. So, so increasing efforts in things like threat hunting, intelligence gathering, and collaborating with folks like local law enforcement. We're also seeing and observing that these threat groups are exploiting the growing challenges that many organizations are facing in the area of asymmetry. So in information security, asymmetry is a fairly significant concern. And this really refers to the significantly more resources that an organization like RIT will expend to protect its critical assets compared to a cyber criminal. The kind of running joke is we have to defend it all, whereas the bad guys only need to find one hole to get in. So this is certainly not unknown amongst the criminals, and they're looking to exploit this more. The other challenge here is the complexity and growing rate of change. Things are just accelerating at such a fast pace. It's very challenging to keep up. Now, so information security is certainly not an easy task, and we're very fortunate to have a very strong team of talented folks and a really great community with the faculty, staff, and the students to help us out. In the next few slides, I'll share with you some insights to how we secure our critical systems, and we'll get to some of the key approaches for risk mitigation. So when we're looking at critical systems, there are two primary things that we look at. Number one is what is the data classification that the system holds? At RIT, we have 4 classifications of data. Things can be public, internal, confidential, or private. Now, if a system holds private or confidential data, that we put that into a bucket of potentially being a critical system. The other one is also what types of processes do these systems support? So does it support a critical business process? If you marry those two together, you have really those very critical systems that do both. They support a critical business function for a university, and it has a lot of private confidential data. We only have a small amount of that, and the key to our approach is ensuring that we keep that small. As I mentioned earlier, there's challenges around the growing attack surface. So attack surface is just a general term that we call for your organization. There's various ways in which the bad guys can get in. And the more systems that you have, the bigger that attack surface. More people, more attack surface as well. One of the things that we look at is network reconnaissance activities. So we have sensors and means to be able to tell if RIT is under attack. So we track these from all the different countries. I'm sure folks can respond or take a guess, but what do you think is the number one country that launches network reconnaissance activities against RIT? I don't have to make sure to respond in chat.
Quiet tonight. Oh, there you go.
What?
They're in chat.
What's that?
They're in chat. Go ahead.
Oh, trying to find, hold on. For some reason I'm not seeing my,
All goes away when you do slides, I know.
that's all right. So what
I'll read it. They're just saying Russia, China, USA, Africa, Iran.
That's a pretty good guess. So the first one is actually the United States. So most of our network reconnaissance activities and attacks are originating from inside the US. Number two is China. Number three is Vietnam for some reason. And here's the rest of them. So now keep in mind, these are network reconnaissance activities. These are fairly obvious probes. Our sensors will detect that you're trying to find out, for example, if there's a port open, it has a vulnerability. And it's interesting to see that many of these are originating from inside. Next one. Another thing that we track are, failed login attempts. So login attempts are essentially you logging onto your system at RIT. And sometimes if you fat finger it, you get the wrong username and password. That qualifies as a failed login attempts. What we're really most concerned about is if you do that not just once, twice, or like 3 times, but a dozen times or 100 times. Any guesses as far as which are the top 3 countries where we track that?
Turkey.
Turkey.
USA.
Turkey, USA, and
anyone else? Nobody else yet.
All right. So number 1 is China. Number 2 is the US. Number 3 is France. Okay. Turkey did not show up. Interestingly, we've had the past 9 months, 10.6 million attempts, failed login attempts. And out of those, they came from 88,000 unique sources. So this is just to illustrate that, in the last 9 months, we were really looking at a fairly significant volume of attacks coming at us. And between the network scans and the failed login attempts, this is just a small snippet of the type of attack patterns that we're seeing. Now, by no means is this is a large volume, but by no means is this as large as what we're seeing in other places, like large organizations. Here's another one. So email. Certainly, we've received the past 9 months about 600 million emails. Out of that, 600 million emails, what percentage do you think is considered a threat? Meaning it's attempt to phish, could be spam, could be something that's just not very good.
85%. Sarah's going for a 2 out of 3 here. Avi or AV, sorry, 75%.
Okay. Pretty close, actually. Pretty close. So 80%.
Oh my gosh.
So 80% of the emails that we receive, that's about 35 million a month, is considered a threat. And we're seeing an increase in the volume and sophistication. This is material in that phishing is one of the key attack vectors that we have to defend against. And when you're dealing with numbers like this, even a 1% failure in our detection is very significant at these numbers. And what we're trying to shoot for is, 1/10 or 1/100th of a percent, just because of the sheer volume. But it also means that even at that volume, you still have thousands of these attacks through email that will come in. And so it requires that we have a number of other layers. And it really requires vigilance in the community. As Chris was talking about earlier, the importance of having knowledgeable and folks that are really aware of these attacks and threats is critical, because there's only so much that their technical defenses can do, especially with a large volume of attacks being lobbed at us. And email is just one of those vectors that we have to defend against. So one of the questions that gets asked that I hear quite a bit is, gee, there's so much coming at you from a cybersecurity perspective. How do you manage all of these risks? Kind of on a side note, I was speaking with a alum from a federal agency, and he had the same exact problem. He said, we have so many attacks coming at us. Their volumes are like, 10 times the size of RIT. And he's saying, I can't make sense of how to try to defend this organization. And the aha moment really was, well, you've got to have a means of being able to sort through all of this noise. When you're talking about, 600 million attacks. In their case, they were talking about billions of attacks. You've got to have a means of being able to prioritize, rank, and stack all of these things to make sense of it. And so for us, if you want to call it the secret sauce, is having a approach to being able to manage all of these risks. And for us, it's a simple 6-step approach. And this is by no means proprietary information. This aligns with a lot of the published data that's out there. So the 6 steps kind of go something like this. So the first step is to identify the context. The context is the environment in which the university operates and is influenced by the risks involved. The second step is to identify the risks. This really means identifying a comprehensive set of positive and negative risks. These are determining events that could enhance or impede the objectives, including risks of failing to pursue an opportunity. And right here, we utilize a tool called the risk register to capture and prioritize the risks identified. More about this in the next slide. Third step is to analyze the risk. So this involves estimating the likelihood that each identified risk event will occur, and also the potential for impact of the consequences. This is really where we prioritize the risk. The exposure is then calculated for each risk based on those 2 factors, the likelihood and the impact. And from here, generally, what we do is we have an analysis and we come up with the response in terms of how to make a decision on how to treat the risk. In this approach, we generally conduct discussions with subject matter experts depending on the risk area. So at RIT, it's not just cybersecurity, but we have many other areas. But all of these are looked at in a comprehensive manner because they have a lot of areas where they overlap. So that's very important. The 5th step is where you monitor, evaluate, and adjust. So the risks are changing at a constant level. So you've got to have a means of being able to monitor, evaluate, and adjust these things. And finally, there has to be reporting and communication. And this is where I think Chris had mentioned earlier the importance of having all the stakeholders involved. In our case, we don't have a CEO, but we have a president and a board of trustees. So this is where they get involved. Now, as I said, one of the key things that we have is this thing called the risk register. Here's an example that's available from NIST. I have the source here. It's from what's called Interagency Report 8268. You've got a very interesting name for it, but this report is really a great resource for anyone looking to build an integrated cybersecurity and enterprise risk management approach. I have the link here and I'll also provide it to Professor Mislin after this. So for anybody that would be interested, that'll be available. That publication is actually a very good handbook. They just published it about 2 months ago for anybody that's interested. We use a very similar risk register here at RIT. And really, the idea here is to use the risk register to list all of the risks. So it doesn't matter if you think it's a very small risk or a large risk, you just use it to compile. And then you go through this list here to be able to classify them and categorize them. And then we do a rank stack based on the exposure rating. So for example, you could have something like phishing, right? And then we rank what is the impact of phishing, what is the likelihood of phishing will occur. At RIT, we have a 5-point system. So impact could be a 4, likelihood could be a 5, and so the risk there is a 20. So you do that for all your risks, and then it allows you to categorize. This is important, and this is the aha moment for a friend of mine who's another alum, in that, oh, so you mean if you can rank stack these things, whatever bubbles up to the top is what you allocate your resources towards the most. And that's the crux of it. It doesn't matter if you have 1,000 or 10,000 risks. You have limited resources, and you've got to have a means of being able to prioritize which one you go after. And so that's the secret saucer approach, so to speak. So one of the cool things about doing this is it allows you to kind of look ahead. And when you see risks coming in, you can make some informed decisions on what types of future initiatives. So I'll share with you briefly some of the key areas that we are investigating for future initiatives based on what we're seeing in the threat landscape and also risks out there. So at RIT, again, I mentioned the critical things. We look at the 3 facets: the people, the process, and technology. And the 2 key areas where we're starting to put a lot of emphasis on is around enterprise information management, and also this concept of zero trust security. These are 2 things that we're seeing in the next few years or so will really be gaining traction, and we're going to be putting a lot more effort and emphasis. Of course, underneath that, there's also additional initiatives under the people, process, and technology verticals. So in a nutshell, that's essentially how we manage information security risks at RIT. Be open to any questions that the group might have. I'll stop sharing here and
sure. So I was looking actually at the list a little bit. Talk to me about, what was it? Passwordless authentication.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so passwordless authentication. It's an excellent question. So essentially, passwordless authentication talks about the next generation of authentication mechanisms. So we're talking about things like.
I was going to say we have people that aren't from RIT on here too. So maybe put it in context of what we currently do versus what we're looking at and maybe doing in the future, right?
Yeah. So at RIT, we like most places, we utilize passwords. So username and password. And we also deployed what's called 2-factor authentication. So in addition to your password, you need another means of authenticating. We have a solution that we use called Duo, where in addition to your password, you have to approve either through your app or through a phone call or to a set of preset codes, second method of authenticating. We're looking at a future where we recognize that technologies that are being used by the bad guys is really outpacing the usefulness of passwords. They have these things right now called rainbow tables. In a nutshell, it's really like a big encyclopedia or dictionary of known passwords. And the attacks that we're seeing, they'll try to do what's called brute force to try to get into your account using these list of known passwords. So as a way to get away from that, we're looking at more robust mechanisms outside of passwords. We have things called certificates, which really simply put is just a really, really, really long password. And so we're looking at utilizing those in conjunction with 2-factor authentication technologies. They have hardware also that we're investigating things like what's called a YubiKey that store these certificates that allow you to do this authentication. Some of our systems right now that are critical to the university actually use passwordless authentication already. So for example, if you try to hack into one of our critical systems, you won't even be presented with a username and password screen. That'll kind of give somebody trying to hack in a head scratch, like how do you log into this thing? Um, but that's one. It's an example of an area that we're investigating as far as having more robust mechanisms.
So take that in comparison to the discussion you and I had a while back, how we have a technology as advanced as that, yet we're still using mag stripes on the back of our IDs,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
how does that play into? Is that part of the prioritization of needs, risk assessment, and I guess speak to that a little bit, because I know that you and I have had that conversation to some degree.
Yeah. So um, certainly, one of the difficult things to try to comprehend is at what level do we deploy new initiatives? Um, Certainly, there's various options. There's the option to deploy a technology university-wide. There's also the option to deploy technology just in key areas. And part of that is driven by the level of risk, but also, quite frankly, what's the risk appetite and funding that's available. And so what we often see is um, uh, you have technologies that are different at different lifespans. So you have quite aging technologies that are still in use, like Magstripe, and then you'll have newer technologies in the forefront, like passwordless authentication and hardware tokens being used as well. The hope here, though, is that um, as you promote more of the newer technology, that there's going to be increased adoption and it'll allow you to phase out the older technology. Um, the hope is that we'll be able to do it in a graceful manner. We have seen in other places where you don't have much of a choice, where a certain event like a breach necessitates the need to phase out the old technology and to really just bring in the new one. So we see that a lot in encryption, for example. So when an encryption cipher gets broken, a cipher is what they use to scramble the information. For example, banks before were using an outdated cipher, and when there was a known breach, they had to scramble really to change what they were using. So we kind of see the same thing here. We're hoping to have a graceful transition
Mhm.
because for the user base, that generally is a much more comfortable experience. But we're also prepared that if something unplanned happens, that we're going to have to do a switch.
So, for example, on the campus at RIT, things that are more critical would get funded faster, kind of like I think it was what, and as industry needs change, I think there was the push for, we went away from the mag stripe reader for credit transactions, credit card transactions, and PCI compliance. So, as an ISO, you were in one of your original tasks, I think, was going through the assessment and replacement, if you will, of many of the on-campus card reader systems. And again, it's also an economical thing, right? Is the money there to do this? And would that be okay to make that investment for the long haul, right? I mean, we had a deadline of October, what was it, 2018? I think we were going to do the transition to all chip, yet we still get away with sliding the card even still today. What it appears to be is that, yeah, I mean, it's on your priority list based on impact and risk, right? And then, the other part of that is, right, we still use mag stripes, but that doesn't mean, and I think this is kind of the other discussion you and I've had, is that you still know where people swipe. And because they're swiping, that identification tracked back, if you will, to that individual. So if that person seems out of place using that swipe, then you have an issue of fraud. And it's still a system that works. It doesn't necessarily need replacing. But yeah, there are new shiny objects to go chase, and maybe wait until it bears itself out to be more effective for other things is also part of the risk assessment.
Yeah, and there's also what we call in the industry compensating controls, meaning you might have a risk that's exposed, but you could layer additional things. For example, we talk about mag stripes. You could also deploy, and we do additional controls like cameras. So in areas where you have mag stripes, you also would have cameras that are monitoring. Um, in addition to that, you could also have, as you said, people monitoring the swipes and auditing them on a periodic basis. These are some strategies that you could utilize to
Layered approach. Yeah.
yeah, just a layered approach. And one of the other added benefits is the failure of one control doesn't cause the whole control environment to come crashing down. You have other layers to help.
Good point. Good point.
I think we had a question from Tristan.
Sure.
Says, I know it's a little late, but how safe would you say the school servers are from cyber attack?
100%, right?
So that's a great question. Um, it's a fairly general question because we have many different servers, and the hardening of those systems depends on the criticality. So for example, if you're talking about uh, the systems that hold financial information, I'm fairly confident that those are very well hardened and they're very well defended against attacks. And we will be notified of any attempts. Matter of fact, we do get notified of attempts to go after those. But now, being a university, there's also the need to allow people to explore, right? So if there are some servers in the campus where you are allowed to try to go after them. We even have, to the other end of the spectrum, what's called honeypots, that their sheer purpose is for people to go after them. And there's the places that are in between. So I would say that depending on the type of information and the criticality to the university, that's really what would dictate how much controls and protection that those servers have. Okay, she said, thank you. Your question from Greg G. Do you share strategies and information on cyber attacks with other schools? For example, Niagara University, Erie Community Colleges had breaches. Did you learn from them at all? So we answer to the question is yes, we participate in what's called the REN ISAC, which is the Research Education Network Information Sharing Community. So it's a tight-knit group, and it's a conglomeration of number of universities, and we do share information with each other. Particularly with Niagara University, we did hear about some of the issues that they had from the REN ISAC. And that's one of the fascinating things and frankly, very unique things about higher education. Prior to coming to RIT, I used to work in manufacturing and in healthcare. And the level of collaboration was almost non-existent. Mm. Whereas in higher education, the community is much more open to sharing information with each other about attacks, which becomes important when we're leveraging that. It almost acts as an early warning system. Next question.
Let me go back on that a little bit. And I'm scrolling back to the question here about the universities. Is it, I mean, RIT obviously is a different school than these other schools. Are we better off because of, the capital outlay, or are community colleges worse off, right? I mean, even though we're a target, what's the target or attack surface in comparison to these other universities? I mean, is it an economical thing, right? Is it based on money, or is it based on other things such as executive decision making, or the awareness of cyber at a C-suite level, right?
I think it's a fairly complex landscape. So I would say that a lot of it is driven by who the attacker is. So if we take, for example, about 2 years ago, there was a group that was loyal to the Iranian government that conducted a fairly large-scale operation. It was so large-scale they actually had a name for it. It was called Silent Librarian. And the mission of that attack was to infiltrate I believe it was 240 different universities in the United States and other countries, with the mission of being able to gather information and also use that as a springboard for other attacks. So with that, they were very successful in that attack. And you know, it didn't matter if you were a private institution or a community college, they targeted those because it was part of the mission that they were trying to accomplish. For skilled adversaries like nation states like that, very few organizations are really well equipped to handle those types of attacks. Frankly, even the federal government has a hard time defending itself against those types of attacks. But now, when you're talking about criminal organizations and perhaps groups that are more opportunistic, I think that that's where you get into some differentiating factors. We are seeing that some of the investments in things like two-factor authentication is making a significant difference. Because for these groups, they're opportunistic and they're not as well funded. So if you go after a target and you have two-factor and you weigh that against another university that does not, you have much higher chance of success with less effort with the group that does not have two-factor authentication. So that's an example of where some of these things, for the ones that are opportunistic and economically driven, there's a lot more fish to fry out there that are not as difficult.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Next question.
Have you had any input on the creation of the new cybersecurity building and its features? So some of the aspects of that building, such as we were just talking about the swipe cards. So that building is implementing the newer technologies as it pertains to access. So that's one area where we did do an evaluation. There was a large group across the university as to what these new ID cards will look like. So that's one area that we participated in. We are also speaking with the director of the Global Cybersecurity Institute, Steve Hoover. So we are in close contact, and we're talking about initiatives that they have in the coming future. I wasn't sure if there was any specific thing with regards to the building that Sonia was interested in.
Sonia, are you there?
Oh, yep.
Is there anything else
Can you
specific?
hear me?
Yeah. Is there anything specifically?
No, I just recently got a tour of the cybersecurity building because I work in Golisano, and I had just seen that room where I believe students can like play around with the servers to the point where they can make the room shake and like change the lighting and stuff. I was just wondering if you had any input in any of those features that the building has.
So I think you're talking about, is it a simulation, the cyber simulation?
Cyber range, yeah.
Cyber range. Yeah. So interestingly, when they were discussing that concept, Professor Mislin and I went to IBM. And I think, Rick, you had Caleb present to the team, right?
Yep.
And so in the early parts of the discussions, actually, Rick played a very instrumental role in a lot of that. So I will say that I think a lot of the concepts that were put in place for that building specifically, there was input, and I would say actually a lot of the influence was driven a lot from what Rick had to say and the influences of the people that he knew.
So Sonia, I'm going to just tell you flat out, I have a meeting Friday to kind of outline my extra additional duties as the creative director for the Global Cybersecurity Institute. And I know that's news to Aldwin as well, but basically the cyber range and the development of how we use all of those neat things is kind of under my purview. So I'd love to get a tour as well. I haven't had one yet, but
I haven't either.
yeah, right. I know. I'm glad you got to see that. That's
I hear it's cool though.
but yeah, I mean, before Caleb Barlow was basically the reason IBM had a cyber range, and we talked about the cyber truck that he brought out to RIT. We are emulating most of that first cyber range that's in Cambridge, Mass. We're emulating at RIT, and yeah, it is a cool building. So anyway, yeah, lots still happening in this space. I think there were other questions, and I'm going to jump over to my doc here that had some of those for you, just so I don't miss out. And if any students want to jump in with them, yeah. So there were a couple of others. What is RIT's next big challenge, cybersecurity wise, right? What do you look? What's on your horizon that's going to really, I know that keeps you up at night, right? And we've talked about some of those, but.
So certainly for me, so again, there's the three pillars, right? The people, the process, and technology. I'll choose the easy one first, which is the technology piece. So from a technology standpoint, AI and automation is certainly a key piece that we're paying close attention to. Like with many things, technology is agnostic. It really is not good nor bad. It really just falls on who's wielding the technology. And we're really seeing evidence that the bad guys are investigating these technologies just as much as we are. And we're trying to keep ahead of those developments and start to try to see how we can utilize these technologies to counter. It's fascinating. I think Chris had mentioned observing chatbots. Well, there's also hostile chatbots. And it kind of leads to the other component of the people piece. So there's this convergence of using technology and also augmenting that with people. So on the fly, you could see some technologies that allow these bots to be tweaked on the fly. And that's quite concerning because like Chris was talking about earlier, where there's techniques to defeat the detection mechanisms. Well, it gets even scarier when you have a real person on the fly tweaking the technology to circumvent your controls. So in the horizon, we're thinking, how do you counter that? And perhaps it requires a similar approach where you would have an augmented type of defense system. And so that's part of a key concern is when you have the melding of those two threats together. And we're seeing evidence that that's becoming more and more prevalent. And from a process piece, I think being able to really having an integrated approach. There's this concept called DevSecOps, where it's development, security, and operations. Traditionally, development, operations, and security was kind of their own silos, and to their detriment, because one didn't know what the other one was doing, and the attackers are really exploiting that. And so we're looking to put more investments in melding them together and pursuing a concept called DevSecOps, so that our organizations are more in tune with the attacks and we're able to kind of shift our defenses in line with what's happening.
The integration of security into the development, stages of everything instead of after the fact, hey, let's bolt this on.
That's correct.
Integration into security and the operational side instead of let's just bolt this on. Makes perfect sense.
Makes sense, but it's a lot harder to implement than it sounds.
Right. I mean, how do you bring the security guy to the table every time, right? And have him explain all that he needs to explain while the developers are like, yeah, but we just need to code it and make it this way. And they don't always take into consideration the security side of it or the operational side. The same thing. They have the same issues. It's like, but we just want it to work. We want the user to have easy access to it. And at the same time, the security guys going, that's all well and good, but you're also making it easier for the attacker. Now you've got to stop and recalibrate, if you will, how that all works out. I'm going to jump to another question here. 2 daily habits, Tara had asked, that help you flourish and remain disciplined in this field. Maybe 1 daily habit. I don't know if you have 2 or 3. I don't know.
Yeah, I got a couple, but I think the the key one that I really try hard to allocate time towards is to stay abreast of the environment. To just There's just so much to learn, and the um, field is expanding ever so rapidly. And so, trying to keep abreast, reading a lot, listening a lot. Um, I was very grateful that I was invited to this because that was a fantastic talk that Chris had. And so listening to what other people that are like, have to say, they're experts in their field, especially.
Right.
I think that that's the key piece is just, it's very hard to, stay abreast of everything that's going on. And there are times where I have to prioritize which pieces I have to keep track of. Because frankly, there's so many things that are emerging. Some will become mainstream, but there are some that will fizzle out.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you invest the necessary time to keep tabs? One strategy that we try to deploy in our team is to have different folks have subject matter expertise. And so we can't keep track of everything, but as a group, if we come up with a strategy of which pieces folks keep track of, which makes us a stronger group.
Sure, sure. So we have one person focused maybe on the social or the, definitely a good point.
But it is difficult really to flourish in this field as just an individual. There's so much that there's only so much that you can do with what you know as an individual, and it really requires having a strong team or good people around you.
Well, and that speaks to even how the way we set this up was because I knew of these people. I've done engagements with them all in some shape or fashion. Yeah. And we all, interestingly enough, have referred to it as the community. And really it is that. I think we all are on the same team trying to share the same ideals and efforts. And some of us doing way beyond, others. I mean, when Chris talked about the Innocent Lives Foundation, things like that really just speak to who we are as a community, I think really made sense. And it's important, right? We can't all keep up. We have experts that we go to, and even within our own team, we have experts, but even beyond that. And I'll be honest, and I'm speaking to a couple of the students that have asked me about this. I literally just reached out to these guys when I ran into an issue that they were able to help with, and they were right there. And that's been pretty much what I found in this community is that, yeah, I can help you. It's no problem, no money, no nothing. It's like, yeah, let's chat, let's get started. And our 4 Chris's are examples of that in this community. So
we can't hear you.
Oh, I dropped out. Sorry.
Yeah.
Everybody. Oh,
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Yeah, my internet's getting choppy here or something. I don't know. But I think there's just to the students, there's a lot of people in this industry that are, yeah, they'll definitely step up and help when when you get into the business is all I was getting at. So
frankly, I would say that as a industry in the community, we don't have much of a choice. Right. The bad guys are also recognizing the power of collaboration, and it's scary. And they're collaborating more and more, and a lot of it's financially driven.
Yep.
And for us, we're relying on the good hearts and goodwill of folks.
Right.
But mostly the community is great, and but that's something that I think is very important to be able to succeed in this field.
Yeah, and there's plenty of opportunity. We're seeing that through all of these discussions too, right? I mean, cybersecurity is not just this little path, and I think that's part of my bringing this as well. I mean, I picked 4 distinct, areas, if you will, for our lead off, and then even our alumni, 4 distinct areas, and this has been really useful. I'm going to ask if there's any more questions out there. I know there are probably some people that wanted to ask something. I'll be quiet for a second. But I also want to be respectful of your time tonight. And I know you've been working long days, even through COVID, things are different in the information security office. So I appreciate your time tonight for this.
I'm very, very glad to be here.
No, well, and Aldwin, I will say, has always been available to all my classes, even some of the other classes that aren't cybersecurity. So I know that Ariana knows that. She was in a different class, I think, when you came in. So if anybody have any other questions for tonight? So one of the things I'm realizing this is a long time period, and we kind of all have listened to a lot of different insights and what have you. So we're going to get some thank yous, and that's cool. I appreciate that, Avi. I've also mentioned that I've noticed that not only are students on this, but parents of students, and that's really encouraging as well, to see the interest of our families at RIT and involvement. So again, your words are not taken lightly. We really do appreciate your time and sharing with everybody out here. And you're getting a couple more thanks. So good deal.
Very, very glad to be here, and glad for you to have me.
So Aldwin, I'm going to invite you to the rest of our talks, obviously as well. And for the rest of you that are here still tonight, we have tonight we had Chris Hadnaghi from Social Engineer LLC, who was just a great different perspective, if you will, of cybersecurity, the human side. And next week at 6 o'clock, and hope you can make it, we've got Chris Nickerson from Layers Consulting, who I think I've sent out a video of Tiger Teams, a TV show, I think in the early 2000s, maybe late 90s, where he and his company would go break into things because they were paid to test the vulnerabilities, both physical and virtual. And I love one of the things that inspired me about Chris, and I heard Chris tonight say it, but the next Chris, he was the kid, and I was the same kid that would see a wire and go, wonder what this thing does, or how do I connect this to this box and make it do something? And it is that drove him, and I think drove me in that same direction of, I'm a geek. How do I make this thing do something that it's not intended to do? Or what can I do with this thing beyond what it's intended to do? So I just wanted to throw that out as kind of a precursor for my students, but also just share kind of what, the environment is, not just so, cut and dry, and some of the things that are coming from that. So anyway, if there are no other questions tonight, I will let you go tonight, and I will let my crowd go tonight, and my interpreter, Hannah, who also just joined us, sorry. But I appreciate you being here. Aldwin, thank you so much. I do appreciate your time tonight. Again, I'm going to say it, and we're going to close off, I think, our second very successful night of this series. And I'm glad you were part of our kickoff event. Thank you.
Again, thanks. Thank you very much for having me. And thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate the questions.